Alrighty, and welcome back to News Commons Radio Hour. We're here in studio with Carla Baranakis and Sarah Stonbely. We're going to do a little bit of Research Corner now, and I promise sooner or later I'm going to put together a little audio segue in the Research Corner. a little coffee, like a sip or something, you know.
That would be perfect.
Smoke a pipe or something. All right, so today we're going to talk about a paper that personally I love this because this is one of those papers. Here, let me move this screen so I can see your face here. Okay, so I want to talk about this paper by Philip M. Napoli, a friend of the Center. You've worked with him, Sarah, in the past. All-around great guy. This is a new side of Phil Napoli. I'm not used to this side of his research, and it made me very happy because I'm much more familiar with this type. This is a law review article.
Well, as I was saying, this is sort of like his roots, I think, because he was a media policy guy before he was doing like more I guess, traditional comm research.
Yeah, so this I can tell because I can see him like swimming in it right now. He's really is in his true form here.
And I really love his writing style. He really makes things so clear. There's no convoluted language.
Yeah,
they're complex ideas, but they're not. It's not explained in a convoluted way.
So the way I would let me just read the title of the paper real quick. There's the title of the paper, and this is published in the Federal Communications Law Journal. I still don't know when this was published.
They never do years. I know. I meant to look it up. I forgot.
Usually it says it. So based on the sources, there are sources here from October 2017, November 2017, I think. So it's maybe
recent.
early 2018, maybe.
Well, he discusses the 2016 presidential election as a case study. So I think it's recent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So the title of the paper is "What If More Speech Is No Longer the Solution? First Amendment Theory Meets Fake News and the Filter Bubble." Mouthful there, no colon. I got to give him that. He does have an question mark, no colon. You see a lot of colons in titles of academic papers. The way that I can sum this paper up, and I think this is the best way I've been able to sum this up, is he's talking about the idea of counter speech as an effective. Is it an effective antidote to bad speech, right? So the sort of axiom, we were just talking about guns earlier, and the idea that the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And the way
it's a perfect analogy.
Yeah, I've summed this up, and he actually does touch on gun control, the outdated aspects of gun legislation and the gun rights and everything. But it's the only way to stop a bad guy with a blog is a good guy with a blog. And is that Brandeis sort of that axiomatic truth that everyone sort of assumes is true, that the way you deal with bad ideas or harmful or toxic ideas is not to censor them and silo them, it's to drown them out with better ideas, right?
Well, and I think perhaps more importantly in this context, the counter speech doctrine is fundamental to the First Amendment.
Right. Yes.
So that's why it's so important to sort of unpack it at this moment, because all of these arguments about allowing misinformation, allowing fake news, allowing all of these things are founded on the First Amendment, and the First Amendment in turn is founded on this idea that all of those bad parts of speech will be drowned out by more good speech.
Yes,
so that's why it's
sort of the marketplace of ideas metaphor. It's a sort of laissez-faire almost, self-interested parties who are free to exercise their lives in their own interest will naturally tend to sort of drown out bad ideas or ignore the ones that tend to be harmful. And I think in the same way we've seen that with capitalism, it doesn't necessarily always work out in economics, and it doesn't always necessarily work out in the realm of speech, especially when, and like capitalism, when you have hyper-capitalism or when you have hyper-communication tools. So when, and again, with guns, when you have machine guns and high-capacity magazines.
Or the ability to print your own in your basement with a 3D printer.
It's basically like the operating system that the Constitution was written on did not take into account the multitude of evolving and, beautifully diverse viruses that are now available. And the Norton antivirus that was put in there as a Bill of Rights to protect against this, bad speech, different forms of that, different forms of massacres and gun violence, all the way through the thing. This sort of hands-off approach that everything will sort of reach a natural equilibrium doesn't necessarily ring true. It's in practice, in reality. And you see that, and one of the things he points to is the rapid and rampant ability to spread false speech or bad speech or misinformation way faster than the ability to combat it or to flood the zone, if you will, with good or corrective speech.
Right. So the article kind of turns on these 6 different ways in which the media ecosystem has changed so dramatically. He said at one point, even since the 2012 election, which I put a little exclamation point in the margin because, so exactly. So it's the structure of the media ecosystem that's changed because of social media largely, but other technologies as well.
Yeah. Just the internet.
The internet alone.
The internet. Basically, the share button. The share button is
around the internet. So that is sort of what he's saying, these are all the different changes, and he lays them out, like you said, the speed at which fake news can travel, the ability to target the more impressionable people,
right,
filter
micro-targeting, yeah.
He calls it an algorithmic marketplace of ideas at one point. So it's all of these different manifestations of digital media, the way this ecosystem has changed. And these things, he says, and I think makes an excellent argument, are making the ability to provide counterspeech against misinformation and fake news almost nearly impossible.
Right. So there's a term for this that, in the media literacy talks that I've done, I can't say it on the radio. It's the asymmetry principle. So bull crap or nonsense or whatever you want to euphemism. But it's an asymmetry. The principle states that the amount of energy required to create, nonsense or whatever, we'll say bad speech, is orders of magnitude smaller than the energy required to refute it.
Right.
So bad speech, counter speech is so much more expensive, essentially, to do good counter speech, and it's so much harder to keep up with. It's so much easier to knock things down.
Not only that, but we have cognitive biases built in that prevent us even from incorporating factual information once we have a bad fact in our minds. And he talks about this literature as well.
Yeah.
And there are several studies that have shown that even once people see, fake news, if they see fake news that they believe, and then they see the counter speech that says, well, actually, it's not that way. It makes them dig in.
Not only do they not incorporate the new correct information and change their views, they in fact harden their positions in most cases
against the correct information,
and see that as an assault on their good senses.
So all of these things combined, I think ultimately what he ends up arguing, and stop me if you don't want to go here yet, but ultimately what he ends up arguing is that 2 things. One, it'd be nice if the government would make some sort of regulation that would address this, but they won't. So secondly, we should rely on all of these big, huge tech companies to adapt to the public service ethos that legacy providers had in the legacy era, which was like the late 20th century from roughly 1960 to 2010.
I think that's a perfect encapsulation of the 2 sort of conclusions and implications. And I want to talk about the first one first because there are just 2 things, first of all, that blew my mind, and I just didn't know. You don't think about this. Number one, everybody knows the sort of, defamation, libel issue. You can't knowingly print or say false things about someone that hurt their reputation. You can knowingly print false things about anyone as long as it's in their favor, as long as it makes them look good. In fact, there is no law, and he says this in the paper on page 64. This is a case. That comes out of his page 64 of the thing. This is a case that comes out of, I think, Washington D.C. or the Superior Court. So here we go. This focus is a reflection of the Superior Court's position that, quote, false statements of fact can cause damage to an individual's reputation that cannot easily be repaired by counterspeech, however persuasive or effective. Now, that's the end of the quote there, and then he continues, no such liabilities exist for the production and dissemination of journalistic falsities for the remaining political issues and concerns around which falsities could be generated, whether old examples or not. Now, it says a news outlet can knowingly reports inflated figures for a candidate's net worth, for example, or charitable donations, thereby enhancing the candidate's status with voters, is in the clear, even if it's subsequently proven that this information was published with the knowledge of its falsity, since it in no way negatively affects the candidate's stature or reputation. That blew my mind. So that's just
crazy.
There is a legal protection for saying as many false, nice things about people as you want. But the moment you start to damage their reputation, then you get in trouble. So that right there.
Is there a legal protection, or is there just no legal consequence?
There's no legal revenue. So there's no legal remedy or yes, exactly. Okay. So you can't be sued for printing nice things, nice fake things about someone. So that's crazy for me, first of all, because that immediately I imagine a network, for instance, if there was a news network, a major cable news network, whose whole job it was to sort of say nice things about a leader.
So do that thought experiment.
Imagine.
What if there was some sort of partisan cable news network?
Maybe too far-fetched for me, but I'm not sure yet.
Yeah, that's so weird.
The second thing here, and where was this? Where is this?
Well, at the end he talks too about a lot of different actually laws that are on the books with the FCC that would make it, they've just never been tried, right? Yeah. It's the news distortion investigations, right? Like
yes.
Is that what you were thinking?
Well, I was thinking of the Washington State Supreme Court decision in 2007, relatively recent, that said explicitly that the court rejected the notion that, quote, protecting the integrity of elections represented a sufficiently compelling governmental interest. So the whole basis of whether or not a court can intervene in an affair or make a decision or issue an injunction is based on the compelling government interest. Do you have a compelling government interest to restrict this right or to curb this? And if the government does not have that interest, the Constitution, the way it's built, you're supposed to err on the side of non-involvement. So unless there's some big reason to do it, like the safety of a citizen's life or property or whatever. In this case, they're saying explicitly that it's not really our job. We don't really care about protecting the integrity of our elections. That's not the business of the government. That is just so pertinent in terms of the most recent.
Yes.
But those two blew my mind.
Yep.
The second part, because we have about 3 more minutes or so, and I want to get to the second conclusion. The idea that the only way to do this, if there's no legal recourse, if there's no governmental or institutional or governmental avenue here to address it, or at least they've expressed an unwillingness to venture into that territory, then we should try to require or culturally impose these sort of standards of public good or public accountability into our private companies and mega corporations. Right off the bat, I'm laughing inside because I just don't think the cynic in me is like, good luck.
Yeah, but you know what, though? There is an interest, and as we saw after the election, right? Facebook, how many people took Facebook off their phones or dropped Facebook, stopped using it because of all the news that had come out about their role in the misinformation, the use by Russia, and all these other things. So actually,
I deleted the app because it drains your battery a lot. But
okay, but actually, I would counter argue to you that if it's a private corporation that depends on revenue and sort of goodwill amongst the audience and people, whatever, in the sense that they want people to like their product, they actually have more of an incentive, right?
Or more of an incentive to create misinformation about them.
No, but I mean, you see the point I'm making. They actually do have an incentive to clean up their act, or at least appear to be cleaning up their act.
Upon threat of economic boycott, essentially.
Yeah,
if you want.
Exactly. So that's a pretty strong incentive for a commercial organization.
I think that works except in cases where, so what are we going to stop you? We're going to go switch to Bing? Are we going to not use Google anymore? It's those things where they become.
Something else will come along, and some other people will start preferring it.
Will Amazon go away? It owns.
I mean, you remember who uses MySpace?
But MySpace isn't used by the CIA and the NSA to host their government servers like Amazon Web Services.
I'm just saying, your point was we can't rely on these private corporations to do the right thing, and I'm saying if the right thing is in their interest, because otherwise people won't use it, then maybe they will.
No, I think you're right. I think ultimately at the core, you're right. I'm just being sort of a lazy thinker at this point. I really just don't want to think about the work that's required to create a movement and a momentum to force and pressure these companies. I mean, it does. It's happening on Fox News when Laura Ingraham gives a Nazi salute or something at an RNC event or something. You see backlash when she does things, and Bill O'Reilly lost a bunch of sponsors. But there is a mechanism, but it requires coordination and solidarity at a level that I think is not always attainable, at least not instantly, and takes time to build. And so it's very fickle in terms of where that momentum goes. But I think you're right. Ultimately, I think you're right.
And I think the other thing, though, to your point, is that if people become fed up enough, and this is the other interesting point of Phil's article, which was like, we have to assume that people don't want fake news. And that was where my red flag sort of went on. Because he was like, we have to, let's just go on the assumption, for argument's sake, that people don't want fake news. And I was
sanity,
like,
let's hope. Just lie to me, baby.
Don't know
lie to me, baby.
If that's true. Because the whole thing kind of turns on that, right? Because if people do want fake news or news that's whatever, then actually the marketplace is being efficient.
Yeah.
So it's responding to a demand. So.
Well, we have to leave it there. We're out of time.
It's a great article.
I highly recommend it. It's a little on the longer side than the ones we usually do, but I only brought it on the show because I think it's worth it. Again, What If More Speech is No Longer the Solution? First Amendment Theory Meets Fake News and the Filter Bubble by Philip Napoli. Well done, Phil. We're going to leave it there. We will be back next Thursday, 1 o'clock, as usual, for more News Commons Radio Hour here on 90.3 FM WMSC Upper Montclair. Now, bear with me as I try to get us back live.